Hey y'all, you're now tuned in to the original podcast of A Stronger Foundation. Welcome. Some call me Doctor, others call me Master T. You can call me anytime. I'm Sweet Tea, the academic architect PDO. That's planner, designer, and overseer of the academic success plan for kids. So tell your neighbor or call somebody and let them know it's that time. Hey y'all, let's get building. Welcome. This podcast is called Infection of the LH virus. What is a virus? According to an online source, it's an infective agent too small to be seen and is only able to multiply within the living cells of a host. Characteristics of a virus typically have detrimental effects such as corrupting the system or destroying data. Viruses are unable to survive without a host. They do not grow or make their own energy. However, they can replicate and adapt to their environment, and all they need and require is a host. What is the LH virus? LH is my acronym for learned helplessness. Hence, the LH virus is an infective, invisible agent that uses a lethargic learner as its host. In this host, the LH virus is able to replicate and thrive, causing corruption to the child's learning system and resulting in long-term detrimental effects. Facts. Again, all viruses require a host in order to thrive. The question we must all ask ourselves now is my child a host of the LH virus? Does my child represent an environment within which learned helplessness can thrive, replicate, and cause corruption of my child's ability to comprehend vital academic skills? How would I even know? What are the symptoms and what are the signs? Well, one sign is resistance to learning. Another sign is throwing tantrums when asked to engage in varying degrees of academic activities. Let's look at some differences in the effects resulting from an infection caused by a virus versus bacterial infection. One significant distinction between infections of viruses versus bacterium is in the treatment process. It's one thing to fight and win the battle against simple infections caused by a regular virus. However, getting rid of a bacterial infection generally requires a complete dose of a prescribed antibiotic. Now, you may notice that when doctors prescribe antibiotics, it's usually accompanied with an explicit warning regarding the importance of finishing the entire medication. This is because failure to complete the antibiotic in its entirety may result in a reinfection of a possible worst form of bacteria. Now, I only know what I know about infections because I had the opportunity once to edit a small portion of a medical curriculum. And what I discovered and found highly interesting from that experience is that there's a certain class of bacteria referred to as resistant bacteria. Now, take note that the common procedure is for bacteria to respond to the prescribed antibiotic and be eliminated. Understand that the very fact that the particular antibiotic is prescribed for that particular bacteria is because it's known to be effective in treating that type. But in the case of resistant bacteria, the treatment failed to produce the desired outcome, and the bacteria is able to withstand the effects of the medicine. Now, again, this is what occurs in the case of the resistant bacteria type. Apparently, the bacteria becomes immune to the treatment and is able to block its effects. This means that resistant bacteria has the ability to endure the very drug that was designed to eliminate it. And so I know at this point it's beginning to sound like a biology lesson. And so let me explain how this applies to the education of your child. First of all, if a child has the early stage of learned helplessness, the virus, they may be cured by simple treatments of the related symptoms. For example, a parent may provide character development training to a lethargic child to get them back on track. That would be a simple fix. Because remember, a virus needs a host. So, by providing the academic cure, the virus would be targeted, treated, and destroyed, and no longer be able to thrive. And that's what we want. But what about if the infecting agent is more like the resistant bacteria that is able to resist all efforts from teachers that is intended as solutions for change? I mean, in the case of late stage of the LH virus. Now, in reality, resistant bacteria are one of the most significant health challenges that the medical field is facing today. Now, in a similar way, in education, learners are becoming increasingly resistant to learning. Regardless of the innovative learning strategies and kid-friendly resources being provided to them, kids seemingly have developed immunity to the best instructional efforts suggested by leading educational psychologists. And so educational psychologists keep going back to the research to reinvent new theories about best practices that will surely be effective against lethargy and low aptitude, but they are no match for a resistant learner. You see, one issue with innovative methods in education is that they often fail to acknowledge the significance of conserving significant portions of the former effective methods now seen to be or thought of to be outdated. They tend to want to unify learning as a one size fits all, which sometimes come across as though out with the old and in with the new is the fix all. But somehow, the more efforts that is dedicated to developing the perfect methods for engaging students by fully encapsulating their interest and approval is the more resistant learners seem to become. But why? Personally, I believe it's because hard exercise still works. I'm not talking about the gym, although that's also true in that case. But I'm referring to hard exercise of the brain. The newest learning theories suggest learning practices in which digital resources essentially things for the students. They limit the degree of physical writing and manual reading and ultimately produces a type of hands-free Think free, easy stress learning. This is done by entertaining more and expecting less. This puts the learner at ease and promotes mental rest. Now, I always try to be clear about my stance on technology in the classroom. I am in full support. I believe that they have successfully transformed the educational system in the direction it needs to go. The new innovations are amazing and highly beneficial to self driven learners. But for learners infected with the LH virus, it may present limited effects that enables and enhances their transformative progression into resistant learners. A significant contributor for being prone to infection of the LH virus is that many children are not exposed to rigor at an early enough stage and therefore develop learned helplessness and other hindering habits. Some also develop low aptitude for learning and miss out on opportunities to build stamina and competence. Year after year, as those hindering agents are neglected, they become negative reinforcers, limiting the child's motivation, which makes them more susceptible to infection. Still, other contributing factors that leads to a child becoming a victim of the LH virus is when they are permitted to be unbalanced in their study and playtime. For example, an 8 to 20 ratio, with 20 being learning time. This unbalance is a sure way of increasing exposure to the LH virus and bacterium. So once a learner becomes infected, what are the alternatives? This brings us to how to fight an academic virus. The most effective method for avoiding any possible infection, academic infection, is for parents to be proactive and create an academic success plan between the period of first grade to just after grade 3. That's the most effective method. Committing to capturing the infection and redirecting a learner between the stage just after grade 3 and before the drop-off zone would be the next best method, because it would be like initiating the regular antibiotic treatment once the infection has already occurred. This is the last stage for a parent to catch and treat the infection before it becomes resistant to treatment. The next alternative and least effective of the three is to attempt to treat the resistant learner at the stages beginning after the Great Divide. At that point, any parent will have one of the greatest challenges they will ever face in their life. And that is because attempting to redirect the child after the Great Divide would be like treating a resistant bacteria. And if the health professional are still fighting this similar challenge, I prefer to keep my distance and avoid this stage of infection in the first place. Now, recall our discussion regarding the importance of taking the entire prescription of antibiotic in order to completely eliminate the bacteria and prevent reinfection. Likewise, it is important to set up an academic success plan versus isolated tutoring, which represents an incomplete medication. Whereas isolated tutoring may produce a quick fix of one to several standards while failing to address others, a specially designed academic plan will fill in all learning gaps to completely secure the foundation. And I guess I should point out, in support of an academic plan, as opposed to isolated tutoring, that incomplete treatment of a regular bacteria essentially has the same effect of treating resistant bacteria. And what that means is that it's that much more difficult. So it's not like the treatment did not work or was not effective, but rather that the medication was not applied the way it was intended in order to produce the desired effect of eliminating the bacteria. So, what is the solution? Primary prevention. Because LH infection doesn't have to happen at all. The best method is to prevent infection of a child's academic foundation in the first place. Not allowing the infection at all is by far the best prevention. This can happen by providing an early, rigorous start. Kids are usually up for the challenge, but parents are sometimes apprehensive of whether their little cubs can withstand the rigor. They can. Why it's important to recognize and eliminate the LH virus? Because untreated viruses spread to all parts of the body, essentially corrupting other good organs. Likewise, failure to correct a weak foundation spreads to the other areas of the child's life, essentially corrupting other good habits, such as work ethics, once they enter the workforce. Preventative methods are most helpful when applied before the infection. Pre-existing conditions like major learning gaps may cause complications of treatment and even present a blockage of the mechanism of action. This means that the child may be failing to make needed connections to help prevent new gaps from forming. On the subject of preventative care, I must discuss immunization. Now, in our society, we immunize children to combat long-term illnesses, even when we have no way of telling whether our children would become vulnerable to them. But based on our experience and knowledge, we immunize them anyway, in spite of their resistance, but just in case. An academic immunization works in a similar way and is equally ethical. An academic immunization would be like inserting rigor and stamina in a child at an early age that would combat the first sign of lethargy and low aptitude. It would ultimately block initial attempts of infection of the LH virus. Just as in real medical cases, academic health coverage for pre-existing conditions can quickly become very costly. Indeed, one of the most controversial issues in healthcare is willingness of insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions. Pre-existing conditions in education are existence of previous learning gaps that has compounded over multiple years. The more gaps a child has is the more at risk they are for becoming victims at the drop-off zone. In financial terms, parents should understand it's going to cost more to redirect a learner after a certain stage. Unfortunately, allowing a child to develop pre-existing conditions will require multiple hours of tutoring to correct the years of compounded gaps. So it's better to ask the questions about your child's educational failures now. Could it have been prevented? Could we have planned for it? Don't stand by and allow your child to become a victim of the LH virus. And certainly don't neglect the compounding gaps that may result in combat with the resistant academic bacteria. Take preventative measures with academic immunization and feel like a boss. Thanks so much for listening.